The movie starts and there is a family on vacation, having fun at the beach. Then they are driving on a countryside road in France on August 30th. The mother, Chloe, calls someone named Sabrina while it rains heavily. Sabrina doesn't pick up and the father, Paul, tells her to call Eric. She says she doesn't have his number. And they come to a gate of a house. Chloe gives him the remote but it doesn't work. She calls the landline but it goes to voicemail. Chloe explains the situation and asks them to call her back. Paul gets out and tries to open the gate while Chloe keeps calling them. Paul climbs the fence and starts running towards the house while yelling for them. Then there are sirens and a police officer comes to Chloe and asks her if they are the ones who called them. She says no, but this is their house and they can't get in. The other police officer points his gun toward Paul and tells him to get on his knees while he tries to explain that this is his house. Chloe sees this and gets out, telling them that he is her husband, but they don't listen to any of them. And one of the police officers makes her return back to the van. Paul still tries to explain himself, but the police officer tells him to shut up, and they arrest him. Later, they are at the police station. They get into a room, and a police officer comes to talk to them. Chloe starts talking to him and says that the policeman acted aggressively because his husband was black. The police look at her and return to the papers in front of him. He starts asking them questions about the house. They say that Sabrina was Louis, their son, childminder, and they got evicted, so they let Sabrina and her husband Eric to stay there while they were on a vacation for 2 months. The police officer brings out a paper and asks if they've signed it. Paul looks at it and says that they did it so they can pay the utility bills while they were away. The police says that he understands, but they can't evict them. Paul says that it's their house, but the police says that it looks like it belongs to them according to the paper. He says that they can't get them out without a court order. Then he warns them to not force their way back, and while they were leaving, they are back at the van, and Chloe says they are going back to the house to talk to them. Paul drives, and they see Sabrina taking the trash outside. She sees them, runs back to the house, and closes the gate. Chloe comes out and asks her how could they do this, and Sabrina responds by saying no comment. Chloe continues to talk to her, and Sabrina says that it's their house. Chloe gets mad and starts yelling at her. Eric comes out and tells Sabrina to go home. Paul argues with him, and they return to the van. They arrive at a campsite. A man named Mikhail comes to them and introduces himself. He says that Chloe and he knows each other from school, and he tells Paul to call him Mickey. He talks about the campsite and lets them in. Paul asks Chloe if they were friends, and she says no, they just knew each other from school. Then he talks to someone on the phone about the house. He hangs up and Chloe comes to him. He says that they even pay the bills, so they can't use it as a reason to get them out. She kisses him and walks away. Then they are talking to a lawyer. She tells them that she did what needed to be done, and they will get their house back as soon as possible. Paul asks if there is any chance of them losing, and she says no. Then the scene shifts to September 5th. They still live at the campsite. Paul is teaching history at school. He talks about natural rights and says that they are life, liberty, and property. One of his students, Kevin, tells him that if someone knows that the owner is going to beat them if someone steals their property, they wouldn't steal it, and one needs to be a man to do that. Paul gets angry and tells him to get out. They argue and Kevin says that he's racist. He suggests that Paul told him to get out just because he is black. Paul goes back to the van and tries to open the door, but he can't and gets mad. Then his friends come out with a cake in their hand and surprise him for his birthday. People are talking and having fun. Chloe is talking with her friends, and she says that she's going to travel to Europe this summer for her job. Paul comes and says that she didn't tell him that. Chloe says he never asked. There is a little tension between them. Then a song plays, and Chloe goes dancing saying that she loves that song. Her friend joins her, and they start dancing while Paul watches them. Then they are talking at night. Paul touches Chloe and tries to kiss her, but she stops him. Chloe wishes him a happy birthday and goes. The scene shifts to September 15th, and they are in a courtroom listening to the judge. They get out and they talk with the lawyer. Paul says that the lawyer told them that they would get the house back today. They talk, and he gets angry and leaves. Then Paul is walking alone at the campsite. He sees a mannequin and throws it into the lake. Mickey opens his porch light and invites him to talk. He gives him a beer, and they talk about their problems. He tells Paul that he's only a victim because he chooses to be one. Paul leaves, and the scene shifts to October 2nd. They are talking with the lawyer again, and she says that she did all she can. Paul gets up and leaves. They talk in the car. Paul complains about how they can't stay in their own house, and he is frustrated that they can't afford another place. Chloe says that their friend invited them, and they can stay there. Then Paul is back at the school. He sees two students fighting, and he starts watching them instead of doing something. Another teacher comes in and separates them. Paul comes back to the campsite, and Mickey sees him. He tells his friend, Frank, that he's the man he's been talking about and calls Paul. He asks if he wants to join them for a guy's night out. Paul sees guns right as he was about to get in, and they tell him to not worry about that. Chloe calls him, but he doesn't answer. They are at a party. They give him alcohol, and he starts drinking. Frank approaches him and tells him that he could get back to his house at gunpoint. He tells him that it's his house, not theirs, and wants him to repeat after him. Then they make him get into a box filled with water and give him a beer. He gets into the water and drinks all of the beer. They all cheer for him, and Paul seems happy. They are drinking around a bonfire, and they hear pig sounds. The others get their guns and start shooting at them, and they encourage Paul to do the same, but he doesn't and keeps drinking. In the morning, they go and look at the pigs. Paul stands in front of a pig that's not eliminated yet. Mickey comes and starts telling him about the history of the place. He says that the place belonged to Frank's father before, and the pigs came after they left. He says that he understands the man, and suggests that he thinks things will sort themselves out. Paul gets the gun from his hand and shoots the pig. They return to the campsite, and Chloe sees the pig's blood on him. She asks what happened, but Paul tells him to get inside and that they are going. They are back at their house, but Paul doesn't stop at the front gate now. He goes to the backyard and breaks through the wooden fence with his car. Chloe asks what he will do. Paul tells her that one of his students called him an Oreo while looking at the house. Chloe asks him what that means, and he says black on the outside, white on the inside, and he's right. Eric comes out. Paul gets out of the van, and Chloe follows him. Louis runs out to the house while Paul argues with Eric, and they start running after him. Eric stops Paul and tells him to not get into his house. They fight, and Chloe tells them to stop. She asks if she can get inside and take Louis out, but Sabrina brings him outside. They are still in the backyard, sitting on the roof of the van and watching the house. Chloe starts talking and tells him that he must ease up. She says that they can't do anything, and Paul should accept it for their family. She tries to convince him, but Paul says he's not going anywhere. Then, Chloe is back at the campsite. She goes to talk with Mickey and tells him to leave her husband alone. Mickey starts talking about their past and tries to touch her. Chloe tells him to stop, but he doesn't, so she hits him and gets out. The scene shifts to October 25th, and Paul is running. He comes to Mickey, and they start talking. Mickey asks him how he learned that Chloe cheated on him, and they start talking about it. Mickey asks why he didn't leave her, and Paul says that it is because he loves her. Mickey says he thinks that he didn't leave because he was afraid to leave her. Later, Paul is making Louis cry and takes pictures of him. Then Paul, Mickey, and Frank are handing out flyers with a picture saying that they need help. The scene shifts to October 31st. Eric comes and takes Paul to the front of the house. There are skinned and beheaded pigs on the gate. He asks what this is, and Paul says that the whole town knows what they did to him, and they hate them. Paul sees Sabrina and sees that she's pregnant. Then he gets back to the van and sees Chloe with the man she danced with at his birthday. She gets into the van and the man talks with Paul. He tells Paul that Mickey is not a good guy, and tells Paul that he needs to pull himself together to keep his family and job. Then he shows him the flyer and they argue about it. Paul goes to the van and asks Chloe where Louis is. She says that they will be staying at her friend's house. Paul makes her get inside the van, and they start arguing. Chloe tells him that he doesn't do anything but talk, and leaves the van. Paul gets out behind her and says that he will settle this tonight. Later, Paul is at a party again. He finds Mickey and they talk. He gives Paul a and Frank brings them alcohol. A woman approaches Paul, and they start kissing. Then he sees Frank going up to a black man who's dancing with a woman and telling him to get out of there. The man doesn't, and Frank starts beating him. Mickey comes and stops him. Paul gets intimate with the woman. She looks up at him, and he sees blood in her mouth. He pushes her away and gets out. He goes out to the street and hears sounds. He goes to check and sees Frank next to the man he fought in the bar. He sees the man's face covered in blood and laying unconscious. He realizes that they are his students and tells Frank to let go. Mickey goes to beat him up, and the others join him while Frank tells Paul that it's okay, and he tells Paul that he should stay out of it. Paul keeps standing in there and watches them beat him up. Then he walks on the side of the road when Mickey and Frank come to him with a car. They tell him to get in, but he doesn't. They try to convince him, but Paul swears at them. Mickey tells Frank to go, but then he stops him and gets out of the car. Mickey tries to talk to him, but Paul says that it doesn't matter anymore. Frank tells what really happened between Mickey and Chloe. Mickey says that he's not the man for her and they fight. Mickey punches him and says that it's a shame. He tells Mickey that they could be good friends, then they leave. Then Paul calls Chloe and says he will talk to the lawyer about Louis' custody, and he won't fight. He talks with Chloe in the van. She says that she wants to grow old with him and that she loves him. They hear yelling and honking when they were about to kiss. Paul tells her to stay in the van and gets out. He runs to the back door of the house. He sees Frank's car and yells at Eric to open the back door and tells him to be quick. Eric comes down and looks outside. They break through the front gate with their car and get in. A bunch of men in pig masks come out of the car, and they start to pour petrol around the front yard. Paul runs to the front yard, and Chloe follows him. They see the place on fire. Paul goes to Mickey and asks him what he wants. Mickey says that he got his wife, and now he wants his house. They argue and Eric comes out. He pushes Paul to the side and asks Mickey if they can talk about it. Mickey laughs at him, and Eric punches Mickey. Then Mickey pulls down his pig mask and starts beating Eric up. Paul and Chloe get Sabrina inside, and they lock the door. Paul sees Sabrina trying to call the police, He takes her phone and smashes it on the ground. Chloe helps Sabrina upstairs, and Paul gets himself a knife. He looks out of the window and sees Eric lying on the ground with his face covered in blood and all alone. He opens the door, gets out, and goes next to him. There is one of the piggy men on the roof with a Molotov in his hand. Paul notices him while throwing it and runs back to the house. Chloe comes down and locks the door. Then they hear a window break from upstairs, and they hear Sabrina screaming. Then the window next to them breaks and Mickey comes inside. They start getting away from him, and they see another piggy man breaking into the house. They slowly get to the renovating part of the house, and they don't notice the big piece of plastic behind them that is wrapped around the door to close it. They get wrapped in it and fall to the ground. Mickey and the others start hitting them with bats. Mickey tells the others to go, and he gets on top of them while making pig noises. Then he laughs and leaves. Paul lifts up the plastic and looks at Chloe, whose face is covered in blood like his. Then he hears Mickey playing music. Mickey turns to the others and says it's party time. They start hitting the furniture with their bats and break everything. Paul sees a man setting his bird on fire, and he cries. Eric is in a vacuum bag, and Sabrina is screaming. They bring her in with another vacuum bag in their hand. They put her in, and they start the vacuum cleaner while Sabrina keeps screaming. Paul gets up, helps Chloe, and takes her inside. He gets her into a closet. He tells her to not move, and that he will be back. He opens the window and gets out. Paul notices that they are gone, and starts looking for them around the house. He finds the window open, and notices the closet. Paul breaks into the house with the van right when Mickey was about to open the closet door. He turns around and goes to Paul. Paul gets back to the backyard, but the van stops, and he can't start it again. Mickey tells Frank to deal with him, and he tells that they will burn his house down. Frank comes and looks for Paul while he hides under the van. Paul attacks him and cuts his ankle, which causes him to fall to the ground. Paul gets on top of him, and Paul eliminates him. Then he gets inside the van and makes a Molotov. He cuts the gas cable of the van and goes to the front of the car. Mickey sees Frank's body and notices Paul. He throws the petrol in his hand to the side, and it starts leaking into the pool. Mickey starts walking toward the van, and Paul gets out of the window before he enters. He blocks the door behind him and throws the Molotov at him. The van explodes, and Mickey comes out burning. He runs to the pool and gets in, but the surface catches on fire. Paul sees his body floating on the surface. He turns around and starts walking towards the house while he sees Mickey getting out of the pool. Paul turns around to look at him again, and he sees Mickey in front of him when he turns back. He attacks Paul and starts punching him. He gets his bat, but Chloe comes up behind him. Then Mickey starts fighting with her and tries to hit Chloe, but Paul hits him with his bat. He falls to the ground, and Paul keeps hitting him over and over again while Chloe watches him. He lies motionless on the ground, and Paul sits down on him. Paul takes off Mickey's mask and sees himself for a moment. Mickey suddenly gets up and tells him that he got his house back, and he falls to the ground again. He goes to hug Chloe, who's crying, and they hear Sabrina yelling for help. They go, open their bags, and let them out. Then Paul gets out and doesn't see Mickey lying there. Later, Louis is looking out of the window of their house, watching his father talking with the police. He runs back to his bed when he turns around and Paul comes. Paul tells him to go to bed and kisses him goodnight. He then goes to their bedroom and sees Chloe naked. They have an intimate moment.